For today's podcast, we're going to be looking at the book of Mark. Now, the book of Mark is thought to have been written with a target audience being Roman Christians. So, this is to be Roman citizens. However, it was originally written in Greek, but not just any Greek, but a very educated form of Greek. We believe that the book of Mark was the first one that was written and circulated. It is shorter than the other Gospels, and really we kind of categorize Matthew, Mark, and Luke together because they're kind of telling the same stories. In fact, we believe that when Luke and Matthew were written, they were actually using the book of Mark as one of their referent materials. Um, Luke and Matthew also had some additional resources that was not available to Mark, perhaps because Mark was written first. Now, the book of Mark was written around the year 70 AD. Mark was thought to have been an interpreter for Peter. So if Mark was an interpreter for Peter, then Mark probably spoke Greek. So perhaps that's why we have come to think of the Gospel of Mark as to have been written by Mark. Was Mark highly educated? I don't know. There is some scrutiny as to the authenticity of the book of Mark actually having been written by Mark. The greater theory is that the book of Mark was written from the community that surrounded Peter. And while Mark was part of that community, it could be that Mark led the writing of it or participated heavily. But there is a little fly in the ointment there because Peter died between 64 and 68 AD, and Mark also died around 68 AD. Mark and Peter are thought to have died about the same time in similar circumstances, but not at the same time. They both weren't murdered at the exact same time, but very, very near about. So they both had been murdered before the Gospel of Mark was thought to have been written. So if that in fact is true, then Mark could not have been the author of the Gospel of Mark. Before we get into the discussion of today's particular gospel, I want us to just look very briefly at the four gospels together: Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. While we have traditionally thought of these as being written by Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, that may not actually be exactly true. When we look at Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, and in the earliest manuscripts that are found, they appear to be written in a very high level of Greek, which would not be an easy task for people that basically spoke Aramaic. It is probably true that whoever the real authentic author of the four gospels, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, came from a community like a community around Matthew, a community around Peter, a community around Paul, and a community around John. So these gospels more than likely are from these four communities of the disciples: Matthew, Peter, Paul, and John. Now, any quotations that were made from these books that we know as the four Gospels, they were referenced as the memoirs of the apostles. They did not get the names Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John attached to them until sometime between 120 AD and 185 AD. 185 AD is the first time where we see the book of Matthew is actually being referenced as Matthew writing this, Matthew saying this. And that came from a gentleman who wasn't all that well received, but that's where it first began. Now, it's believed that the book of Mark is written by someone within Peter's circle of influence or Peter's community, which might be this man Mark or John Mark, he's sometimes referenced as. And if he wrote these would have been things that he heard within the community of Peter's followers, or more closely aligned with Peter, and the things in there by tradition. It's Mark wrote these things that he heard Peter talk about, and then Peter had to approve them before they began to be circulated. So this Gospel of Jesus probably came from the community around Peter, and maybe this man Mark wrote it, or maybe not. The level of language from the earliest things, documents, lead us to believe that, yeah, probably wasn't. The Gospel of Mark was probably written just from whoever it was, maybe Mark, or the people that were in the community with Mark and Peter, the things that Peter said, and they wrote down the things that they remember Peter saying. Now, whoever wrote Matthew and whoever wrote Luke, they would have had access to Mark's writings of the things that, and I'm still saying Mark as if Mark is the author, because traditionally that's the way we have thought it, and that's traditionally the way we're going to think it, no matter what. But the writings that we now say someone named Mark wrote them, those are the things that Peter shared. Whoever wrote Matthew, it had been someone from Matthew's community, and whoever wrote Luke would be someone in Paul's community. I think the Gospel of Mark, the real title is probably what we call, it's that very first verse that was the title, but then when they retitled it the Gospel of Mark, then they moved what was the title down into the verse. Along about the second century, the Gospel of Thomas and the Gospel of Peter began to be circulating, and there were some like, yeah, there's some funny things going on with those. We're not sure those are authentic, but it's like, okay, everybody knew the name Peter and Thomas, but these other four Gospels did not have a name. And so one of the theories is they put names on them, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, to give them credibility to kind of contradict the problems they were having with the Gospel of Thomas and Peter. Hopefully that gave you some more background information to help you in understanding the books of the Bible that we call the four Gospels: Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. Pulling out, especially when we're looking at Matthew, Mark, and Luke, it's sometimes, because these are the synoptic gospels where they tell kind of the same thing, and because the Gospel of Mark was likely used as referent material for whomever, or if it was a group of people or one person, whoever wrote the books of Luke and Matthew, they had Mark as a reference. And so it is believed that Mark came first. Luke and Matthew had some more references because they came from later. And when we get into the Gospel of Matthew next week, we'll have a little more to talk about when it comes to Matthew. Uh, when I was writing my book Deep and Wide over here, um, I wanted to make sure that when I was looking at Luke, Mark, and Matthew, when I was writing those devotionals, well, you will find some of the same stories in there, but I didn't want to just uh, I'll pick out 5 or 6 stories and we'll talk about those, and we'll talk about them 3 times in Luke and Mark and in Matthew. So while last week's study using the Gospel of Luke, the main story that I want to focus on was the temptation of Jesus, and today in Mark, the main story I want to focus on is fishers of men. Fishers of men. Um, we often think about Jesus calling the fishermen. We know Peter and Andrew were fishers, and we know James and John were fishermen. We have other scriptures where all the disciples go out fishing. Um, Fishing probably was a skill that all people learned back then, because the fish are just out there swimming around, just waiting for you. Hungry? Go get some fish. You can always eat fish. And so fishing was a a story that the people could connect to. So when Jesus calls the fishermen, James and John and Andrew and Peter, he says, "Come, follow me. I'll make you fishers of men." And I really like that story of being fishers for men. Um, and I want us to think about that in a certain way. When you go out fishing, you never know what you're going to catch. Really, we're going out to get fish. If you're like me, you probably have some fish that are your favorite fishes. At my age, I have learned the structure of the English language with which that I use, and so that is the English according to Larry. That's how I use the word fish and fishes. But anyway, you probably are like, if you're like me, you have your favorite type of fish. I like red snapper. I like cod. That's my favorite. Haddock. Any of the white fishes that are very, very mild in flavor, I like. I like the texture of those types of fishes. I'm not such a fan of catfish, although catfish up at the restaurants in East Texas, the catfish is good. When I moved to the valley and started going and having catfish, this is trash. I wouldn't eat it, and so I've kind of lost my taste for catfish once I got away from East Texas, because it just wasn't the same. So I'm going to tell you a story about fishing. When I was a wee lad, when I was a little boy, I lived in Scotland, and I lived in the little village called Inverkip. Inverkip was at the mouth of the River Clyde. Uh, uh, in American English, we put river at the end, like Mississippi River. Um, uh, in Scotland, where I lived, river went at the end. So we wouldn't say the Mississippi River, we'd say the River Mississippi. So we would say the Clyde River, but there we called it the River Clyde. So the River Clyde passes through Glasgow, comes around Greenock and Gurrock, and then makes the bend at the edge of what looks like a peninsula, but it's just on the edge, and then curves south. And there's a little, it was a fishing village when I lived there, Inverkip, Scotland. Now it's grown quite a bit. It's not just a tiny little village anymore, but it's got a harbor there where people moor their sailing boats. So it's become more of a sailing harbor, more hoity-toity than it was when I lived there. But anyway, I remember one time when my family went out fishing on a fishing boat, and I couldn't have been very old, maybe second grade. I don't think I was third grade, because when I was third grade, we moved to the United States. So probably about second grade, and I do remember that. However, if I was second grade, that means my little brother was first grade. He was a year and a half behind me, but 1 year behind me in school at that point. And so we went out on a fishing boat. And I remember it. It couldn't have been a very big boat. We took the ferry boat across the river a few times. There was a store where we could get American goods on the other side of River Clyde, and my mother went over there probably when we were in school. She probably went more than we did on the ferry boat, but not very often. And so I do remember riding ferry boats where you drive your car on and you'd go across the river. But I do remember this fishing boat, and I remember the waves. The waves in that part of the between the North Atlantic and the North Sea. That strip of ocean that comes up between Ireland and Scotland up through there. The waves are it's not smooth waters, but it's pretty rough. And I remember it being real rough as we were going up and down, and it was cold and damp and wet. But we were fishing, and we weren't fishing with poles, and we weren't dragging nets. We had these racks. They were square like this, and there were fishing lines which were like ropes. They weren't like that very thin fishing line what we use today if we go fishing in Galveston, but there were like little ropes that were hanging off of that, and on the end of each rope there were 7 or 8 hooks. And so to start with, you'd put bait on each one of those hooks, and you would start unrolling your rack just by turning it over and over, and then the line would go out. And you weren't looking for the bobbins to bob in the water like you do, because you're in the ocean. It's rough water. So you'd throw it out, and as the ship would go through, I think they had some sort of sonar things. In the 1960s, I assume they had some sort of sonar that helped them with their fishing. I don't know that. I'm just guessing. I know today they have sonar that you can tell where the fish are and where they are swimming. We were actively fishing for cod. My family liked cod. Cod is a cold water fish. That's what one of the primary fish sources were, ocean fish then. So we were out swimming for cod, and they had found an area where they felt sure that we would find some cod. And so they came the announcement, okay, it's time to cast your line. So we would cast our line and we'd throw it out, and then we would then just wind the cord around, and then if it got too heavy, we would just keep turning our big square rack, and it'd come up, and every hook would have a fish on it. But we didn't have time to put more bait on. We would just keep throwing our line out, and those fish were just biting the raw hooks. And so we would pull them up, and I have no idea how many fish we caught. We caught a lot of fish. Now, we were out actively fishing for cod. Do you think every fish we pulled in that day was actually cod? Well, no, it wasn't. And in fact, someone caught a rather large fish, I remember. And so they had it up and they put it in a tub of water. I don't know why, but this is what I remember seeing. And I remember my dad taking me and my brother to the other side of the boat and say, "Oh, they caught a big fish over here. Come look." So we stopped fishing and we went over, and maybe we had already moved on past, but we went over and they had this fish in there. And I remember they either could tell by the fish that the fish belly was large, and a lot of there are types of fish that have live births. It's where the eggs hatch inside them. I used to have aquarium, so I had types of fish that that you see the little bitty specks of fish, because they would hatch inside the mamas and then that have live births. But I remember they opened up this big fish, and it was full of little bitty baby fish. And so I still remember looking at that and being amazed. Maybe that was one of my Well, it wasn't my first experience with actual science right in front of my eyes, uh, uh, but it was fascinating. It was fascinating to me. I don't remember thinking this is gross or making me queasy. It was just an amazing thing to see and learn. Now, I that was many years ago. Um, I moved to the United States from Scotland in 1971. So we're talking about many years ago. This fishing probably happened in 1969, maybe 1970. And I still remember that. And it made an imprint upon me. And believe it or not, I have a lot of spiritual connections to that fishing trip. We went out. We were fishing. We were fishing for cod. It was a cod fishing expedition that my dad signed us up for, and so we were out because we wanted to catch some cod, and that's what we were fishing for. That's what we thought we wanted, but we were out fishing, and we did not make a sign that said we're fishing for cod. If you're not cod, we don't want you. Go away. No. We fished, we caught a bunch of fish. We sorted it out. Uh, if we wanted the cod, you took the cod, and there were other fish there. There were other fish there. I don't remember taking the fish home and cooking and eating it. My mother never was one for cooking fish in the house, and even myself, I don't cook fish in the house. It stinks. In fact, I go to the fish market that's like 2 blocks from my house, where George and Barbara Bush went to buy their fish. Um, for those of you who don't know, George and Barbara Bush, their house in Houston was like 2 miles, between 1 and 2 miles from my house. So they were in this area. And if you watched Barbara Bush's funeral, it was a, not just a couple of blocks, but maybe 10 blocks from my house. And the streets all around here were closed, so we couldn't get in. And then when George H.W. Bush's funeral was there at St. Martin's Church, um, again, I had to stay home, even though it was just a few blocks, because all the streets around here were closed for that. But anyway, so I live in the area where George and Barbara Bush lived when they were in Texas, not in Maine, post presidency. And anyway, so the little fish shop is just 2 blocks from my house, where George and Barbara Bush would go in and eat fish when they wanted fish. And I'll go in there, and I'm not a big fish person. The type of fish that I like is North Atlantic fish, which is not what you get around here in Houston if you want fresh fish. But I do go in there and I get shrimp, because the shrimp around here is good. But it's a little fish shop where you can go in and you can order. I mean, you can order. There's tables. You can sit down. I mean, it's not fancy. It's like a little hole in the wall. But I can have fish. I can go in there and you can order fish and eat there. But you can also buy the fish fresh and take it home and prepare it yourself. I don't like the strong smell of fish. So when I go there, I don't eat the fish there, because I smell the fish market part, and it's just a turn off to me. So I'm not a person who likes the smell of fish. So I don't remember my mother cooking the fish. I remember my mother cooking shrimp when we lived in the Rio Grande Valley here, and we'd get the Gulf shrimp from Port Isabel. But I don't remember my mother cooking fish. So anyway, I don't like the smell of fish. So I don't know what we did with the fish. I remember the fishing trip. I don't remember the eating of the fish. I do remember we would stop at the Chippy along the side of the road. It was just like, seems like a newsstand, and we'd buy fish, and they'd wrap it in newspaper and put the vinegar right on it in there and wrap it up in newspaper, and we'd take it home and eat it. But uh, there were other fish that was caught. I'm sure there were some people on the boat, or the expedition that knew the other type of fish, and knew what to do with it, and how to prepare it. But nobody put a sign on the boat that said, we're only catching cod today. If you're not cod, you'll need to find another boat. You know, when Jesus called his disciples to be fishers of men, and he used that metaphor because um, we know at least 4 of them were actually fishers by trade, so they knew and understood that. And when they went out sharing that Jesus called them to be fishers of mankind, they could connect with that, and they understood that. And I want us to continue with the metaphor that Jesus started with us and talk about, as you're going out looking for fish or fishing, you're not limiting that which you're fishing for. When you go out fishing, you may have something in mind, but your fishing expedition is not limited to just what you think you're going to catch. And that's the way we should be in living our lives. We cannot limit the people that's going to cross our path, the people that are going to be presented to us in ministry, the people with which we will have an opportunity to minister. You go out fishing, you don't know what fish is going to be caught in your nets or be caught on your fishing lines. You don't know that. If you are living your life, shining your light so that people see you as someone who's following the life and lessons of Jesus, loving all people, caring for all people, helping all people, doing everything we can to ensure that everyone has equal access to having their needs met. We don't know who's going to see us do that. We don't know who's going to come up to us and say, hey, I noticed that you blah, blah, blah. What motivates you to do that? Why do you do that? Because that's what real ministry is. Ministry is not going out with your Bible and whacking people. That, let me tell you what the Bible says. No. This is not for me to go out and whack people with it. This is not a weapon. This is for me to read, deconstruct, think, apply. What does this mean for me? And then I do it. And then I live it. If I'm talking about the Bible, I'm talking about the Bible for me. And I keep whacking the microphone here. But this is my Bible, so I read it, and it's for me. It's not for me to take and whack you with it. That's not what it's about. If you're following the life and lessons of Jesus truly, as Jesus truly intended for us to do, it was to love all people and live our lives in such a way that people ask us questions or they see, I know you go to church, and I know there's a whole lot of people now that say they're Christian, but they're treating people like terrible. They're doing terrible things. They're rounding up people and putting them in jail, and they didn't do anything. They're calling out military to come and get rid of all the homeless. And we told those homeless they had to be gone by tomorrow. Well, what do you think they're going to do? Buy a plane ticket and go somewhere else? I mean, get real. So when you have people that are in need, you want to hide them? Or if y'all are going to be in need, you have to go do that somewhere else because I don't want to see it. You see where that doesn't make any sense? So when people, I live my life in such a way that people will say, are you a Christian? Because they see something and they wonder, but it doesn't, in today's world, it doesn't set, because we have these ideas of these people that say they're Christian. And unfortunately, if when you say you're a Christian, all we think about are these hypocrites and horrible people that treat people badly, that we think about discrimination. We think about prejudice. We think about racist. We think about homophobia people. We think about all these things. When you hear the word Christian, you think about bad people. So we need to live our lives in such a way that we're not going about telling people, hey, I'm a Christian and you need to do this just like me so you can be good like me. That's hogwash. That's not what it's about. It's not what it's about. I need to live my life in such a way that people, and it's almost like a whisper, are you a Christian? Because they're confused by that. Because when we see Christian, we see abuse and we see hatred. So when they see something in me and they come out and says, are you a Christian? Then that means I'm living my life in such a way that they see something, they question, and they initiate the conversation, not the other way around. Not the other way around. Not the other way around. And when people show up in your churches, I remember in the 60s and 70s, believe it or not, when I left, when I moved to the United States, uh, we had a few months as getting settled and landing where we're going to land, but we ended up in the South Georgia town of Brunswick, Georgia. Talk about culture shock. Uh, Huge difference. Uh, Blatant prejudice. In fact, in my 5th grade year, the city of Brunswick, Georgia, was under a desegregation order, and so they had to. You'd go to one school and it was all black. You go to one school, it's all white. Uh, and part of that was because, well, the schools were near where people lived, and people lived very segregated. This was the black part of town. This was the white part of town. That's that's kind of how it was, and yeah, segregation was desired by the people in charge, and they wanted it that way. Uh, but they had to come to a creative solution to desegregate the schools. And the way they did that in Brunswick was they had, if you were in 5th grade, you went to one school, everybody in the whole town, and this school became the 5th grade school. So we had a whole school of 5th grade. I doubt that that's the way it is now, but that's how they handled desegregation at that point. So when I was in 5th grade, my brother who was in 4th grade, we went to different schools. And I really haven't talked to him about his 4th grade experiences, but he was at the school where I went to 3rd and 4th grade, where he went to 2nd, 3rd, and 4th grade. So not sure what his experiences were there. But in that moment in time, the 1972 to 1974 was the years that I lived in South Georgia on the coast. And I know what the people were like. I saw it. I experienced it. I took that in my little mind, and there it sat. Now, back in those times, if a black family moved into your neighborhood, there was a problem. If a black family came to your church, there might have been a problem. And in many places, there were. In fact, I just talked about that in my topical podcast this week on inclusion versus exclusion. So when we are called to live in our world and minister to those that are in our communities, then that's what we do. If the church has a real or a perceived sign that says, these people can't come here. We've got a sign that says all are welcome, but we have limits on that. If you're in one of these categories, or if some of these adjectives describe you, then you are not really welcome here. You need to get your own little church over there for people with your color of skin, or with your gender expression, or your gender identity, or your actual genders. So we are called to be fishers of mankind, humans. We are called to live our lives in such a way that we draw all mankind, all humans, to want to know about our experiences and our beliefs. We want people to question, especially living in our world today where being a Christian is a bad thing in our world. Saying you're a Christian, I don't want to tell someone I'm a Christian, because if I ever say, yeah, I'm a Christian, but not like those, I can't say I am a Christian. I have to say I'm a Christian, but not like those, but not like those, but not like those. I have to add that. So when people ask me, are you a Christian? I say, I am a person who chooses to follow the life and lessons of Jesus and show love, kindness, and help anyone that I can, because that's what I'm supposed to do. So, from looking at Mark, I focused right in on the fishers of mankind in Mark chapter 1, verse 17. And I connected with this little fishing story when I went fishing, and we were fishing for cod, but we didn't put a sign on the boat. And we didn't refuse fish from being able to chomp on our hooks if they weren't the right kind of fish. You cannot really talk about any of the Gospels without talking about the clarifications that Jesus continued to make every opportunity he had, when he said, the most important, if you're going to talk about rules, the most important thing for you to know and understand, the most important thing for you to do is to love other people and make sure that they're being cared for and that they're not being hurt by the people in charge. Let me say that again for the people in the back of the room. Making sure you're loving all people and making sure that some people are not being hurt by the people in charge. So, there's a lot of meat to be gained from the book of Mark because it is shorter and more to the point and less elaborated upon. We'll talk more about Matthew and John coming up. If you didn't already see my podcast on Luke, know that that was last week's. This week's is Mark. Middle of next week, Matthew will come out, and the following week, John. Thank you for watching. Stay tuned with me. See you on the next episode of Words to Ponder. Be sure to like, share, and subscribe.